Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Educator Innovator Hangout. It's Wednesday, February 25th, 2015, and we're here to kick off a two-part series about the Open Portfolio Project. This project was convened by Maker Education Initiative in collaboration with Indiana University's Creativity Labs. And today we'll be sharing some background from the project and sharing some of what we've been learning from Maker portfolios along the way. And then next week on March 4th, also Wednesday at 1 o'clock, we'll dive back in and look more specifically at some of the ways that makers have been documenting and reflecting on their work and practices as they go. So really excited about this. I'm your host, Christina Cantrill from the National Writing Project. And I'm excited to welcome our guests today who have been connected to this work in a variety of ways. I'll let you all introduce each other. So introduce yourselves. Sorry. And what I would suggest is just maybe your name and where you work, and then maybe mention how you were connected to this project. And Anna, I'll start with you because you're on my extreme left.
Sure. Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a second-year doctorate student at Indiana University School of Education here in Bloomington, where it's super freezing cold right now still. My advisor is Dr. Kylie Pepler, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but I am working in her creativity lab here at Indiana University, where we really bring together educators, artists, designers, and theorists or educational theorists who are interested in constructivist and design-based learning. And our projects mainly focus on maker culture, designing systems, arts, and creativity that is happening in and out of school.
Great. Thank you, Anna. And Jessica Ross?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Ross, and I work at Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Ed. And we have a lot of projects here that we've had for the past 47 years that this research institute's been open, looking at arts, creativity, learning in and through the arts, so long history of looking at portfolio work. And probably talk a little more today about a current project that I'm on called Agency by Design, which looks at the promises, practices, and pedagogies in maker-centered learning. And it's great to be here.
Great. Thank you. Now let's pass it over to Hillary and Jessica, the other Jessica, who are in the same space.
Great. Hello, I'm Jessica Walker from Parsons, the New School for Design. And my role here is really as part of a partnership with DreamYard, which Hillary will talk about. And my role at Parsons is that I direct pre-college programming across all different areas of design, and we're really interested in how we increase access for young people to find their way into the arts. So I'm really actively engaged in thinking about how portfolios can serve many different audiences and many different types of students coming in pre-college.
And I'm Hillary Kolos. I'm the Director of Digital Learning at DreamYard. We are an arts education nonprofit in the Bronx, and we do in-school programming, out-of-school programming, and we have a high school called DreamYard Prep. And my job there is to help incorporate technology into all the great work that we do. And I came here because we've been having, the folks that we work with at DreamYard have been talking to Parsons for a long time about how to help support our young people in portfolio in art and design, but also now we're thinking beyond art and design, how we can help our young people document their work and tell their own learning story. And so we've been in this collaboration 2 years that you will be hearing about more soon.
Super, thank you. And then Stephanie.
Hi everyone, I am Stephanie Chang. I am the Director of Programs here at Maker Education Initiative, Maker Ed. We're a nonprofit that focuses on maker education and in creating more opportunities for all youth to learn, to engage in learning through making. And we are really lucky to be able to work with Anna and Kylie at Indiana University, and actually Christina, Jessica, Hillary, and Jessica, all of whom are part of our Open Portfolio Project national working group, and they've been really critical in helping us with this process and this project, and we're really excited to be here today.
Great, thank you everyone. So before we go further and get started, I wanted to just say for those who might be watching this Hangout that we really encourage you to jump into the chat that should be running alongside the broadcast, and encourage you to ask questions, put in comments, anything you'd like to bring to the fore here in the webinar, and we'll be happy to take that up. In the background is Paul O, so he will grab your questions and share them with us. So thank you, Paul. Okay, great. So why don't we get started? And yeah, I'll turn it to Stephanie and Anna to sort of get us started with, you know, what is the Open Portfolio Project anyway?
I can kind of introduce it a little bit, and Anna, feel free to jump in. So our Open Portfolio Project started about a year and a half ago in late 2013. It's generously supported by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation here in Palo Alto, California. And the goal of it is really to develop and start to learn, but really develop a common set of practices for maker portfolio creation, reflection, assessment, and sharing. The past year and a half or so has been a true, I think, exploration and diving into understanding the general landscape of what youth-oriented makerspaces and maker culture look like, what sorts of activities they're engaging in, who is actually engaging in this sort of work, and how they're capturing the process of what they do. So it's been exciting. We've done a lot of really good stuff with the help of our National Working Group members, and we're excited to share out about it.
Anna, did you want to add anything to that, or?
I think, so our project has been split up into several phases. So initially, we started out with a brief literature review where we really consolidated our vision for open portfolios and the project and where we wanted to go with this. This was then followed by a survey that was disseminated nationwide across different makerspaces, and a bunch of makerspaces responded to our survey, really giving us information on where they're located, what their maker programming involves, and how their programming aligns with national learning initiatives and standards, but also how they are documenting their work already. So we have lots of really interesting information to share on that. And then based on these really super interesting results, we selected 10 sites that we wanted to visit and that we ended up visiting as our field sites throughout the project. So over the past summer and fall, we visited several sites, 10 in total. There were schools, private, as well as public schools, museum spaces, a library space, and out of school, after school programming, maker spaces.
Great. And we put a link in the chat to the main homepage of the project. And maybe you could give us an overview into the findings and what we've been learning so far. I mean, it's, you know, this sort of learning about portfolios is really, as Stephanie said, been learning about youth maker spaces and culture in many ways. So really excited to hear what those findings are, and wanted to mention that there's a link to some of the briefs that you've put together on the link we sent out. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So that website contains a little bit more background information on the project itself, how it got started, why we were kind of interested in the work, and how it relates to Maker Ed as an organization. There's also a link to a whole big blog series, actually, that presents snapshots of a lot of our field site visits throughout the summer and fall, so that viewers and readers can get a closer glimpse into what it is that we found and the really exciting events that we got to take part in. And then it also links to all of our research briefs. We have released 7 of 9, and so there are 7 plus some appendices all on that page. Feel free to download them, read them, share them. There's some really neat findings and analysis there. And as Anna mentioned, we started with a brief literature review, really just to situate where it is that this project sits amongst all of the work that has been done in portfolios over the history of time and learning and education. Portfolios, as I think most people know, are not new, but we're really excited to learn how maker portfolios are different, how they can be used in educational settings and environments, and really what the opportunities there are for learners to express and showcase their abilities, their voice, their interests in a way that they may not be able to in other settings or in other forms. So we recently, you can see through some of our research briefs, have released our analysis of our survey data, which I think Anna will dive into a little bit more, and then also seen some themes and commonalities that have arisen through a lot of our field site research, and I think we can talk to that a little bit more as we continue our conversation today.
So in terms of the surveys, we have the survey was extremely large scale in terms of the amount of questions that we asked. So what we've done, we sort of passed out all the results into 3 of 9 research briefs that Stephanie mentioned earlier. So the first research brief on the survey really focuses on introducing the sites. So in total, 51 sites participated in the Maker Site survey, of which 50 were from the US and 1 site from South Korea. So that was quite exciting to have some international input there as well. They served a median of 450 youth annually. So there was and this is really a median, so in total there are reaching from 50 participants annually to 850,000. So it's really a diverse and large reaching number. In terms of physical settings, we had respondents that were that had makerspaces situated in schools, including private as well as public schools, in libraries, museums, after school centers. So what was really interesting, I think, that we found out in terms of population, that maker sites really serve a diverse population or diverse demographics. That is, in comparison to most, census, U.S. Census data of 2010, really much more diverse than even that, as well as more diverse than the demographics that are, or the adult demographics that generally attend maker fairs, as well as adult maker spaces. So in terms of just the demographics and the kinds of spaces that participated, we saw a huge diversity. So I'm not sure. So I have, I could give an overview of the different making in relation to learning standards, but could also dive further into the kinds of portfolio practices that the sites reported on. So which one do you think is more interesting to focus on right now?
I was thinking who are doing portfolios in their own spaces, if you want to potentially introduce that work. Portfolio practices.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, I think I'm coming up here. Sorry.
Yeah, I think
so. I was thinking. Do you want to do some of the portfolio practices that emerge so that we then can hear a little bit about what's happening at Parsons and Dreamyard? That might be a nice segue.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So most of the sites that participated thought that portfolios and documentation in general of making in progress and finished maker projects or challenges that the makers encountered during the making process were super important. So 45% thought it was very important, others thought moderately important, but generally most of the sites thought it was super important. Different documentation practices that were reported were really reaching from super simple documentation like 1 picture is posted onto a blog to really elaborate documentation, for example, a how-to guide on instructables, or a more elaborate blog series where different makers bridge their documentation across projects. In terms of sharing, we asked how do they share their documentations. We had an interesting result there where a lot of sites said that they really like to share their work publicly, but several sites also reported that they wanted to share their work more privately, meaning internally within the community of the makerspace, sharing with the youth, maybe their parents, but not necessarily privately, openly available on the web. Some of these also said that they share privately as well as publicly. So there's these differences, and I think they are really interesting. Then we found that oftentimes makers, or a lot of sites reported that makers document themselves with their work, as well as the process of making and themselves, or showing themselves while they are making, which is really stands in contrast to a lot of the fine arts documentation where the product, the maker, as well as the process are sort of documented separately, and there are perhaps more separations. We were also really interested in the feedback and reflection practices of maker sites, and the maker sites reported that, or well, most of them reported that feedback or giving feedback to youth on their practices, on their project, was very important for them. And they reported mainly peer feedback as well, sort of peer-to-peer feedback, but as well as larger group feedback. And that youth also utilized this feedback to improve their work. So it wasn't just sort of giving the feedback and then never to be seen again, but they really could see how the youth really built on that feedback. Yeah, so peer review and group feedback, different kinds of group feedback really was reported mainly before publishing works. And I think Hillary and Jessica can really speak about that too in their experiences. They present their work later. And then we also found a number of barriers for that spaces reported for documentation. Interestingly, not too much the quality of internet reception or access to internet, while some sites do still feel that there is a barrier in terms of the access to internet or high-speed internet. Most sites felt that they really did have good access to high-speed internet. However, access to technology for taking high-quality photographs, videos, the number of staff available to support documentation was really considered a strong barrier. Other professional development challenges as well, such as, for example, being trained in particular software that could support the development of portfolios. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up what we found in terms of makerspaces and their self-reported, I have to note, documentation practices. And I think that really is something that needs to be highlighted, that really the makerspaces reported this data themselves, and that we feel this gives a good opportunity for researchers to dive into a particular aspect that we have that I summarized here and that we documented in our research brief.
That's great. I was thinking that these sites are all, when we talk about makers and makerspaces, they're pretty diverse in terms of what kind of making is happening in these sites too, right? And so it would be great to hear from one example so we can sort of tie what you're saying to an example. And so maybe Hillary and Jessica, you guys could share what you've been working on there at DreamYards and Parsons.
Great. So we are going to attempt to do a screen share here. Let us know if you have any problems seeing this. Is that a full screen image?
Right now I see, oh, there it is. Okay, great.
Great. So this is Jessica talking from Parsons, and just before we start chatting a little bit more, we thought it would be really helpful to bring up one of the first slides we made together as part of our partnership, because we want to make sure that this question is always a part of what we're thinking about, which is who gets left behind when you think about portfolios in a very traditional way, meaning work that is final and you're working toward this goal without necessarily showing a lot of your process or your learning story along the way. That's one big part of what our partnership is about. And the next slide here shows if we could make our goals visual in a single slide for what we think a portfolio could be, or like what our ideal portfolio should be for our students in this partnership we're working on. We're really thinking about having a platform that's interactive, so we've tended to make portfolios a blogging platform where it's constantly being updated, it's digital. We have been working on helping students show their work in progress so that they're not just prizing these amazing, beautiful final works, but that the story along the way is documented just as well, so that it shows evidence of who they are and how they make decisions. We are really interested in our students' portfolios being multidisciplinary, meaning that not only in their blog or their learning portfolio are they showing artwork that's very visual in nature, but they're also showing work from their science class or their history class and tying in their in-class learning with what they're learning outside of a standard educational day. And also one really important part of our portfolio is that it's easily shareable, and I think that speaks a little bit to what Anna was bringing up about peer review and ownership. We're really interested in making this something that's very accessible, and students are taking ownership of how they choose to share it with anyone from their peers to a college admissions counselor.
So this is Hillary from DreamYard, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've actually been doing. That's a lot of sort of the ideas behind it, and we were really excited to learn about Parsons' learning portfolio model that they're doing with their undergraduates here, and we were able to get a grant from the Hive Digital Media and Learning Fund from the New York Community Trust. We got a pilot grant, and now we're in sort of a second 2-year grant. And we wanted to see what this learning portfolio model would look like in the high school setting, both in and out of school. So what the project has actually been is to introduce the learning portfolio model that Parsons created at first the DreamYard Art Center and the DreamYard Preparatory High School. At the Art Center, we have about 9 out-of-school programs that go from K through 12th, and we picked a couple of those programs to start a pilot in. At the DreamYard Preparatory High School is an arts-focused high school in the Bronx, kind of a small high school, but it's a regular public school where all the students major in an art. And this year we've added the Parsons Pre-College Academy, which is pre-college programming out of school, but on a college campus. And so we have these 3 sites that are all completely different from each other, really different contexts. And we've introduced this kind of similar model at each one, and they've really each taken on a life of its own, which is really exciting. Yeah, we're just finding there's a different audience at each group. There's different content that they're teaching at each group. The classes range from fashion, visual arts, global studies, math. So we're really working out that interdisciplinary part of what Jessica was talking about before. And a really big part of the partnership has been bringing educators together. So in this picture, you see 2 of our educators from DreamYard Prep along with a faculty member from Parsons working together. And even though they're each working at these 3 very different sites, we bring them together. Last year it was monthly, and now it's a little harder to get the bigger group together. But when they come together, they each talk about all their best practices and common challenges, and it's really amazing to find the similarities they have with blogging and portfolio development and just digital literacy in general, and how we've presented them this model and sort of these principles, and they're really running with it and creating resources around it, implementing it in their own curriculum in a way, sharing the results and problem solving together. And we're really at each site doing a bit of a culture shift. I think that's sort of one of the main goals around digital learning and portfolio development, and giving young people more agency about their learning stories. And the best way that we've found to do that, and really key to our project, is getting these educators together to figure it out themselves, rather than kind of like just handing them a curriculum and saying, do this. They're really figuring out how it works together.
Great. So one of the things we want to do today is show some examples from the project that we have collected so far. So the two kind of different categories that I've broken these examples into from Parsons are, we have a 2-week academy program running in August, and we have found that it's really helpful for those very short kind of experiences here to keep class blogs. And this is a little bit different than what we're calling an individual student learning portfolio, which I've got examples below here. But just to give an example of a class blog as a portfolio, you can see Tyler Kelly's printmaking class here really has served as almost like a repository for just lots of images. It works really well to keep track of student work, both individually and as a group. But one of the things that he did that I think is really helpful is he took each day and had one student reflect on the process of learning that day. So I think when you have a class that not everyone has access to the computer, maybe you have one classroom computer, this becomes a really great way for one student to take ownership over a particular assignment and utilize the technology in the room as much as you can, even if everyone doesn't have access to it. Another example is Julian Guthrie's fashion design class, which they made a Wix page to show not only how the class is running, what are the assignments, what are the materials you're going to need that day, but also he's created a link to all the other student blogs and the student work, so that it's a combination of a class blog but also these individual learning portfolios from students. And then lastly, there's another class blog from an architecture class that is very similar, showing kind of a combination of student work and progress, but also written reflection from the students closer toward the bottom, and just more about their field trips and how that is relating to the work they're doing in the class. Here's some more information about the actual assignments and things like that. So that's one example of a class blog, or several examples of class blogs. The difference here in the next group is that these are students who are working on individual learning portfolios. The first one I'm showing is Chet Lun Lo, who the really exciting thing about his work is that before he came to Parsons, he wasn't as prolific, I would say, but now in keeping this learning portfolio, this running Tumblr page of his work, he keeps it like a sketchbook, and it's extremely prolific. I mean, every time I look at this, he's posted something new. He's incorporating reflection about his work right beside great digital documentation that shows process. This portfolio he recently used to go to apply to college at Central St. Martin's in London, where he's going to go and study fashion design. So we're very excited about how this was a stepping stone for him in reaching that goal. Next up, we have another example of a student learning portfolio. I really love that she titled this Artist in the Making. I think that it's really nice to see that she thinks of process in that way, and one of the main posts here is a congratulations about her recently getting accepted to SVA for college. And I think it's really exciting to see that in the same context as her fine art practice, her photography. Her life mixed with her art making, I think, is really exciting to see in a portfolio. And also she's got more information about process, the different kinds of materials she's using, and using this platform to really show many of the things that she's working on that are finished and in progress. And then one last portfolio from Emma, who is not applying to art school, but that's okay too. She's applying, I think, to study science in college, but this is a really great example of taking what she's studying in visual culture and bringing that into her learning portfolio and putting it alongside work that she's making to see the relationship between art history and her own work. And she's got great documentation of this series of ceramic macaroons and other pastries. And this is kind of like a mood board that serves as like her inspiration for her work. So yeah, those are some examples from Parsons.
And we have some more from DreamYard. Christina, are the websites coming through all right when we were scrolling through them?
Yes, I believe it's visible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'll go through all of these, but just to move quickly, I'll start with a fashion class we have at our art center. If anybody wants to check out the links, otherwise we can send them out. But this is a blog. This is a class blog. So this is made by the Educator on Tumblr for the students, where they can go. She sometimes will repost things that the students post on their own blogs, but often she's kind of using it as a way to show the young people what they're going to do. So she makes these great visuals in her notebook and uses them sort of as worksheets, and she'll put those up there in case they want to access them later. They've been trying to think a lot about social justice in fashion, so here in the first post they were looking at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fires. So she'll post pictures and context and history around that and sort of teach from it, so project it in front of the class and talk about it, but also it's there for later use, so it kind of becomes a great archive of her class. And then a totally different setting is in DreamYard Prep, our high school, in a global studies class. They're using Blogger there because Tumblr is actually blocked in the school, but Blogger has actually been a great platform because the students all have Google accounts. So Jessica is the teacher of this class along with Terrence Burke, I believe, and she's really great at using GIFs and memes to get her message across. But it looks a little bit more like a standard class might, but again, it's a great archive of the work. And then I believe either in this class or another class they're having students comment on it. So they don't have their own blog yet, but this is sort of getting them started with thinking about blogging, and then they might have the students blog later, if not just start with comments. So this is them putting up a lot of the presentations that they already make for the class, but now there's one place online where the students can go back and look at it. And then just two students examples. George was a senior last year, and he's actually now a freshman at Parsons, which we're so happy about. And he was really a superstar, and I would say, added as much brilliance to the project last year as did a lot of the educators. He did as a student. So he used Tumblr, and when you look at this Tumblr, not all of this is his work. A lot of it is stuff that he's inspired by, but he really taught us last year about using Tumblr tags and these tabs on the side, or these kind of like menu items on the side. So I would look at his blog and be like, well, I don't really know what's your work and what's not. So he was able to tag the stuff that's his own work versus what's inspiration, and you can click over here on the side, something like work in progress, and then you'll see all of his work in progress. And I think he also writes about it sometimes. Or now he's got Parsons' work up here, my art. So he really taught us about the importance of tagging, and now he's actually helping the students who are still in the class. He comes back as an intern to help them think about it. And then one last example that's sort of similar, but a senior this year, is Michaela, who's a really amazing artist. She also has a lot of inspiration on her portfolio page, which is a great place to keep it. But up at the top, you can click on my artwork, and then you can scroll through the work that she's doing on her own. And also she does a lot of writing. So the teacher, Carla Rapice, she has them write a lot and show reflections on their own work. So this is one of her latest pieces. So finally, we just have 2 more slides. What we've been learning is a lot. The biggest thing is that a blog does not always make a portfolio, especially as you saw, if something wasn't tagged or organized, it's just kind of like a big place you keep a lot of your work. So the tagging has really helped to make these feel more like a portfolio, as well as like writing and more structured activities. Also, just creating digital content takes a lot of time. So that's sort of like a big first step, even before blogging, is making sure that our young people are creating things on computers and know how to take pictures, know how to type, and all those digital literacy skills that go along with creating blogs and digital portfolios. And then finally, I've already said this, but it's really becoming important, is organizing the blogs and portfolios with tags and pages so that you can get around it. It kind of takes you from that step of a blog to a learning portfolio.
And in conclusion, we are thinking about the future, obviously, with this partnership and beyond. And one of the things that all of the sites have kind of come across is that we're really interested in giving students more ownership over this, and we are in the process of building support systems that are peer-run at each site. So here that looks like students engaging in kind of mentoring opportunities who have already gone through this type of workshop experience before, and Hillary mentioned that happening at DreamYard as well. And we're really just thinking about how we can grow what we've learned and share it with more people. One way we're planning to do that at Parsons is to offer a free online portfolio development course for students to engage with the things we're learning about documenting process and writing about your work, so that we can share that message loud and clear with more students who are interested in learning about how do you get into art school and how do you write an artist statement. And so we're working on an online portfolio development class.
I'll take this off. So yeah, we will let go of screen share.
Yeah, this is awesome. And I'm hoping that everybody was able to see that well. And my only regret is that I couldn't actually look at some of that work more closely. But I was thinking that I was really excited to hear you talk about sort of the relationship between the teachers keeping portfolios and the students keeping portfolios. And I heard a lot about like learning from each other about this, kind of in the process of doing this. So I thought that was a really interesting piece. And before we sort of dive into a more open conversation about all this, I wanted to also invite Jessica Ross to talk about some of her work. And I know that through Project Zero and Agency by Design, we've been looking at portfolios for many years over time as educators and as learners. So maybe I could turn it over to you, and then we can sort of open it up for a more full discussion.
Sure. I think that what's interesting is some of the areas that really dovetail between sort of long-standing and ongoing work at PZ and what I heard today. Particularly, it's so great to just bring student work into the room. So thanks, Jessica and Hillary, to have examples to kind of pull from and look at, make it really rich. I think that the work we've been doing with Agency by Design is specifically looking at maker-centered learning. So some of them is happening in informal makerspaces and some in K-12. And some things are really parallel with the Open Portfolio Project, and some things are slightly different, where we're trying to look at some of the thinking and learning opportunities in making and also in documenting that making, so in both. I think the overlaps are our sort of belief or hope in the potential for all this kind of work to really be empowering and agency building. And so the idea about a portfolio that's open and with the student as a creator and curator as a central focus is really intriguing to us to look at. I think coupled with that, what we've been working on is working with teachers all along the way and working much like you two just said you're doing, but creating study groups for teachers to get together. I think they're one of the real needs or something to really try and think about is how teachers can also be empowered and agentic about creating their own, modeling this by creating their own portfolios and feeling okay with everything, learning all of these things all at once, the time for thinking about this stuff, what reflection really means, what the learning goals are, and then how to show that and share it and document it. And we've talked about, documenting for the moment for the class, but also for the learner to look at a long range of their learning over time, from one class to the next class, and one making experience to the next making experience, or one later, a year later, or 2 years later. So I think there's just like a lot for both the educators and the learners to think about. And I think sometimes the learners are easier about kind of putting it all together and sort of dealing with it and curating and moving later, and educators who only have the learners for a short period of time with specific goals maybe a little bit more stuck or caught up or feel more tension around how to document, what to pick, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's very hard. I think that's very hard, and that's what we've seen with the teacher groups we're working with and with the classes. And that said, like Hillary and Jess, we keep seeing beautiful work coming out of classes and out of the student stuff, and also the whole class we've been gathering too some similar things, whether it's a class blog or just even the teachers creating some documentation around one unit that happened in the class and having student voice in there, teacher voice in there, and those pieces. So I think that's all important. The other thing, process work and messy work, is something we've celebrated for a long time at Project Zero. We know it's also something that's a cultural piece and sometimes has to be a cultural shift in certain organizations to share and celebrate and demonstrate really messy process work, and how to do that in a way that's sensitive to visitors coming to the building just once and only seeing all kinds of other audiences, and how you handle that, which can be a big puzzle. And the other piece that I think you touched on, and you could even see in the work, is in addition to this choice about the portfolios and what skills and abilities that they may show and share, what acquisitions in that way, also how they demonstrate different kinds of learning over time and different kinds of values that the learner has over time, and how to articulate those through the documentation. So I think you see it, you can see the potential for it, but it also becomes another puzzle for the learner and the educators to think about how to highlight those pieces that might be a little bit more abstract or a little bit harder to focus in on than how maybe I learned how to use a tool this semester, or how I refined a piece of my craft this semester, but something more abstract than how I learned to really ask great questions this semester, or how I became much more reflective, or how I made interdisciplinary connections over some time. So I think I think you can see all those things in the work, but how to highlight and draw those out are very interesting areas for exploration. So, and I think those are some of the areas that definitely dovetail into the work that we're doing. I'll share the website for our project. I'll put it over in our chat, and I guess it can be also put up on the front page. And the one thing that we have done that's come out of our work with teachers too is develop some brief thinking routines, some just discourse on thinking, some prompts for teachers to use either in the moments of making, or even in reflection on it, or critique, or in portfolio design, to make the thinking visible in making opportunities, or to even actually maybe parse out different kinds of thinking that you want to happen in making experiences. And so those are on our website.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Really valuable resources, and I love the insights that you brought out of this work. Hillary and Jessica, you brought that work. I'll give you a chance to respond first, and then maybe open it up for broader conversation.
Yeah, I know we both like went when she said we're on mute, but talking about like showing process, and I know that that happens from before blogging, right? Like whether in your bulletin board are you going to show sort of works of progress versus just final pieces,
Yeah.
and also that different cultures appreciate that in different ways, and different environments appreciate that in different ways. So explaining to young people why process is important, or explaining to another university why progress or process is important, I think it really varies, and that was that was interesting. I think we both that resonated with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that comes up a lot for us when we think about what the ideal portfolio could look like or could be, is that it could easily transform between the forward-facing and the backward-facing. Like, if there was some magical button that you could push and it would be like the first button would show all of the amazing kind of connected learning that you're doing and all the process messy work, and then you could easily push a button and then it was just this beautiful polished final thing that maybe was more of like a moment when you need to be a professional and you need to only show something that is final. That's kind of the dream portfolio that can work between those things.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how it seems like you guys, that both the youth and the teachers are playing with like how to do that kind of stuff with their portfolios. I could sort of see a mix of that. And I also thought that there's the inspiration in there too, in those portfolios, that is yet a different piece. That's like an attribution and a tribute and a like collection or curation of some sort. So that's all interesting, and from a writing project perspective, I feel like it's very much this like compositional act around like purpose and audience. That seems like there's lots of that happening sort of all at once, lots of different purposes and audiences, and sort of trying to organize for those. And I know that Anna and Stephanie, just in the sort of research that you've been doing, you've been running into this across different maker sites and people speaking about these kind of issues. Do you want to speak to this at all?
Sure. So a lot of the aspects that Jessica Ross, Hillary, and Jessica mentioned really resonate with the kinds of things that we've been finding across spaces, particularly challenges such as curating. So we found a lot of challenges related to thinking about how much to document, sort of using automated documentation processes versus really diving in and manually collecting data. How does that disrupt the flow of making? How should individuals versus collaborative projects be documented? And also how stationary or mobile documentation practices should be when we see that making in diverse makerspaces is really distributed across several workspaces within one makerspace. So these kind of challenges that are perhaps more practical in nature is really what we've seen across spaces, but then also really interesting practices, for example, adults modeling documentation practices for youth, that I think really came out in the examples Hillary and Jessica shared, where the teachers are engaging in documentation with the students together, modeling their practices, but also allowing the students to really take the work from one space to another. So when we see portfolios that are then later used for college applications, the students may build on them throughout their experiences across spaces. That we've seen was really important. But these are just sort of small snippets of the things that we've seen. And yeah, Stephanie, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I agree. Those are conversations that we've been having across field site visits and just conversations with practitioners and researchers alike. A lot of the examples that and practices that Hillary and Jessica brought up are things that we're looking at a little more closely. And for one example that I can think of right off the top of my head is one of our field sites was Bay Area Video Coalition, and as Christina had mentioned earlier too, the sites that we visited and that we surveyed are all very different in nature. Not only the type that they might be associated with, whether they're museum-based, library-based, school-based, out-of-school time-based, but also really what their focused activities are. So some of them don't necessarily identify as maker programs or maker spaces or maker sites, and that's okay. We're really kind of excited to see what people are doing across the board. And so, for instance, in terms of the Bay Area Video Coalition, their focus is a lot on art and media production. They do a lot of video design, sound design, website, graphics. And so their portfolios tend to look more like what you might call traditional portfolios. They are online. But when I talked with a lot of the instructors there, they struggled in wanting their students and themselves to make the learning visible, but also struggled with the idea that not everyone who sees a rough cut will understand what really to look for or to comprehend out of looking at that. Whereas taking a photo or a video of a woodworking piece in progress or metalworking piece in progress is going to have a much different effect. So I think that's something that we're investigating further and trying to understand what aspects of the process to show are useful for the audience that the portfolio is oriented towards too.
Great. Jess, do you want to go? Jessica Ross?
This is all making me think. I was noticing when Hillary and Jess shared their image of the teachers together looking at the portfolio piece, I just kind of keep coming back to this really, I think, tricky space. I mean, I think, Christina, you and I may remember this sort of from writing across a curriculum where, the English department might be really used to looking at student work in a way, looking at a certain kind of student work, and then the art, people in the art department, it's hard enough to get them together even in a department to look at student work together and to do that. That's really heavy lifting anyway. But then people in the same discipline at least have a vocabulary, a set of looking skills for this, a way to talk to the students about this. But what's exciting too about making is across disciplines, but it's also turns into a situation where we know from history of writing across a curriculum to get the math teacher and the PE teacher and the history teacher and then the arts teacher in the room to support a learner who's maybe trying to build a portfolio and design things and curate from the things you're excited about. Just how to get this group together with the learner to talk about looking at student work and what that means the time, which we know is a constraint, but even within the time, it's a whole learning, when you come in to say, well, what will we pick from math, or what are you excited about in this, when maybe in that content area I need to do some learning first before I can support the learner. So it's exciting, but it's not a light lift for everybody supporting the learner and moving through these to make these quite dynamic interdisciplinary portfolios. So I think, the idea that when you guys said that you're going to put online, even for the young people, how to start building these and thinking about these, I think for the educators, I think study groups and those pieces that many of us are including and talking about including are absolutely necessary to support educators who want to do this kind of work. And I think it's been very exciting to work with the different groups we've worked with out in Oakland, and now we have a national group, people from all these diverse schools, informal settings, formal settings, museum educators, getting together and having conversations is kind of busting apart sort of the discipline, English department, looking and supporting students. So I'm excited about that, but I also think all kinds of tools will need to get to educators as well to support that.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And when I was listening to Hillary and Jessica talking, the documentation of this work you're doing between those sites and how those conversations are happening in that interdisciplinary way are just such valuable insights and data and documentation to also share, because I think exactly what Jessica's saying, that it's complex work. We have a couple more minutes. I wanted to just say something about next week's webinar because it starts to pick up on this, I believe. We have people from next week's webinar from the Digital Harbor Foundation, Monticello High School, and Millville Library. So we'll get to hear more about how some of these conversations are happening in a diversity of spaces. Stephanie, is there anything about that you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I think we're just excited to extend the conversation a little bit more next week, hear more from those particular guests about what they're doing in their spaces as well, as a comparison and contrast to what Hillary and Jessica are doing as part of their collaboration. It's, again, we're learning from all different sorts of disciplines and spaces, practices as well, and I think we'll be able to show some more concrete examples of what portfolios look like coming out of each of those organizations and places as well.
Great. And I was thinking that maybe we could do sort of a round of final thoughts as we close, and I'll sort of let it be open and not call on anyone right away. But I'm left sort of thinking, as I have been actually thinking all along, like how to support some of the sort of tools and resources. I think these briefs are incredibly valuable. Insights into really a range of different spaces and different intentions with portfolios and different kinds of portfolios and different ways to keep portfolios. You just get like such a beautiful range of things to look at and start to think with. So one of my questions for us as the writing project is how we can start to bring together some of the resources we have to do the kind of conversations that Jessica was talking about, really support that multidisciplinary work. That's one of my final thoughts. Any other final thoughts?
I mean, I'll mention something that we're really excited about too, is that in understanding and gaining a better comprehension of what is happening in the spaces already, we're kind of excited, kind of what all of us mentioned earlier about the documentation that's happening of the portfolios on a level that reaches educators and practitioners who are looking and talking about how this actually functions within their department or across disciplines, is thinking through what the design of that experience looks like for the learners. And that's something that we've been talking about a lot and are excited to dig into a little bit more in future phases of the work to understand how to enable this in settings that either are already doing it or haven't done it yet.
All right. Go ahead.
I can say something. I mean, so to me, it always comes back to that first question that Jessica had on the first slide of who's getting left behind in the kind of older version. So there's still a lot we have to learn and take from the good work that's already been done in portfolios, but especially in certain areas, if students don't have the access to, the class that helps them make the portfolio or the, whatever it is, slides or whatever, how can we really democratize this process of telling your learning story and, putting that link in additional information in addition to your SAT scores and, just the final work or something like that. So that's what's most important about this work, me, and I think to us and to our project. And then also how we spread this, like we've been trying to be not prescriptive about it and say, like, here's the curriculum that teaches you how to do a learning portfolio. But obviously some of it we need to pass on and document. So how do you spread these good practices beyond, with webinars and all that stuff, and get other teachers to try it out and share what they're learning? I think we're still figuring that all out.
Mm-hmm.
I would, if I could, I think my the democratization piece is key, and I also think it's key to how to, with that, keep the learner as creator central and not turn the portfolio into just a longer, more elaborate, standardized assessment. And so as much as we want to share, I love that you said we don't want to standardize or say that this is the way to do it. So it's so let's keep thinking about how to do that. I think that's great. Thanks for saying that.
Really cool. And I think also just in connection to what Jessica Ross was saying earlier about the multidisciplinary aspects of making, that's really something that came out of our surveys as well, that making really aligns with a lot of subjects across the school curriculum, or what at least the sites reported on that. And I think in that sense, it's really interesting that we have an opportunity of work that can really reflect a lot of the things that we have initially thought being placed into specific subject areas, and we really have an opportunity to look at these works and really think about how assessment may be thought about in different ways through these works that are documented.
Yeah, so it's a very active learning process, I would say, and I would invite anybody watching and listening into this process too, and to then also join us next Wednesday, March 4th at 1 p.m. Pacific. It's part 2, and with a focus on documentation and making. As I said, we'll have guests and some work to share from Digital Harbor Foundation in Baltimore, Monticello High School in Virginia, and Millville Library. So we're at the end here. If you're interested, I want to first thank everybody so much for making the time and taking the time to be here and to share this great work and these great resources that are emerging out of this this work. Also, very much thanks to Hillary and Jessica for bringing your students and teachers' work into the mix. As Jessica Ross said, that's very incredibly valuable for us all to be able to see that, so thank you. And if you're interested in further opportunities vis-a-vis the Educator Innovator initiative, we encourage you to sign up for the monthly newsletter at educatorinnovator.org. And all of the briefs that came out from this project, resources from Agency by Design, and lots of different groups have come together to share resources as they get developed and to then come together and have conversations about them. And so sign up for Educator Innovator will sort of connect you with those pieces as they develop. And it sounds like there's more briefs to come, so really excited about that too. So have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and thank you again.